All right. Hello, 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 hello. Hi, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon. How are you? Uh,
Hey, hi,
I was,
Josh. Uh,
you're the only one there. It's okay though.
Am I
Um,
okay?
yeah, yeah. So no, I mean, there's a few people watching, I expect, but nobody else to respond to my "How are you?" So I appreciate you being there. How are you, Dan?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. I think, as I said, I'm stuck in a hotel room, hoping the Wi-Fi holds together. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. But yeah.
Ah, that's okay. It'll be fine. Look, I've trained my audience to expect absolutely nothing, just the absolute baseline of quality here. So I'm sure you're more than meet the bar, even at every other word. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
no, super grateful to meet you. Look, I know you're in on the road, and nobody likes to have time constraints and commitments when there's flights to be caught and hotels in which to be checked and all that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
really, thank you, thank you, thank you. Where are you going? Going someplace fun?
I'm going to my client in Amsterdam. Yeah, I was going to be there this evening, and but yeah, so that's been put back a day. But anyway, I'll get there for an evening meal, I think. Anyway, we'll
Yeah,
we'll
but
chill
you're in
and
the
have the FaceTime.
UK, right?
I'm in the UK. Yeah, yeah.
So it's like a
But
45-minute flight.
something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just on the way down from. I was visiting my folks up in the Yorkshire Dales. So I don't normally fly. I'm in Manchester right now. I would normally fly from a bit further south in Birmingham.
Okay.
Anyway, UK geography. But yeah, so I don't really know this place. But yeah, so it's like as I'm passing by on the way home, the wife dumped me out and said, "Catch the flight," and then the airline said, maybe not. So, we've had a lot of
Not
snow here,
today.
a lot of
Yeah,
snow. I think all the planes in the wrong place. So, you know,
it's
yeah.
catchy. It's all over this eastern seaboard. We've just had endless flights that have been detained, delayed, whatever.
Mm,
Um, it's not good.
yeah, yeah.
I too am suffering from slightly inclement weather. It dropped down to 22 Celsius from 23, and how will I
Where are you
survive?
again? Did you say
I'm in
you're going to pass on?
Martinique, a beautiful
Martinique.
Caribbean island in a French Caribbean in the French Antilles
Very
area.
nice. I've never been there. It looks rather lovely.
Me too. My first time. It is. Yeah, I can recommend it. These those French, they have figured out how to island. Like this place is, you take because it's got all the cool things you want from a great island with great people, plus some French food and the French language,
Yeah.
which I happen to speak, which is nice. And yeah, color me impressed. This has been good. I've been to Saint Martin, I've been to Saint Bart's, and now Martinique, and these are all Saint Martin is the Dutch half of that island, by the way, and I've been there as well.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
of
so you
course. Yeah,
got
yeah.
Saint Martin and then Saint Martin, and they're on the same island, but they're just divided in half. They're both
Mm,
eurozone countries, so who cares? But there's effectively no difference. But in theory, one speaks French and the other speaks Dutch, but in practice, both speak English. Um,
I know.
yeah, whatever. It's just all that to say. Like I love Europe, but it's cold in the winter in the mainland, so you get the best of both worlds. Go to the tropical Europe. It's a cheat
Yeah,
code.
yeah.
It's really good. This is like I'm going to Anguilla next tomorrow morning. Actually, we go to Anguilla, which is English, I think, right?
Mm.
Um,
Maybe. I'm not
English.
sure.
Yeah, it's a
You
British
want to check?
overseas territory.
Okay.
So
As I
yeah,
say,
that'll be.
I've not been there, so
Yeah,
very good.
well, that's, like I said, it's a cheat code. It's you want to drive on the other side of the road, but also enjoy like rum and
The other side of
cheese
the
and
road, no, the correct side of the road. Just
yeah.
be precise about this. Let's get
I'm
this right.
sorry. You guys just cheated Scrabble, all those extra vowels. It's not fair. No, yeah. So we're going to Anguilla tomorrow. I'll be sure to practice my English for you there. Hey, look, anyway, I'm super grateful to meet you. I know we didn't get a chance to really talk before because you're on the road and I'm kind of in a hammock in far-flung places. But I've heard a little bit about this project on which you did that video, and it was really interesting. Can you explain briefly what it is and why people might have already learned about you and your work?
Yeah, well, they
And
might,
also,
they might not.
who are
Mhm.
you? Sorry.
Who am I? Yeah, so my name's Dan Haywood. So yeah, as you said, I'm based in the UK, and I'm an independent consultant. So, but I've been involved with this framework or its predecessors for since I first came across it at a conference in 2002. So yeah, and so it's kind of defined my professional career actually, more or less since then. Yeah, so it is sort of it is my life. But so Apache Causeway is an Apache project. But and its predecessors, it had originally its name, which perhaps explains what it's about, was the Naked Objects Framework.
Oh, this I did hear about. Okay. Go on.
Yes, so that's what I encountered back in 2002 at a conference. Richard Pawson, Rob Matthews, they were the original guys who wrote this stuff, and yeah, so off the back of that, I kind of teamed up with those guys, and we did some stuff over in Ireland, which is where I'm still working actually. And
Which
then
part of Ireland?
yeah, Dublin. So that's where we.
I love Dublin.
Yeah. So that's.
Are you
Yeah.
like Irish or like what kind
No,
of
I'm
what
not. No,
flavor of
I'm
English?
based in the UK, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I'm over there most weeks, most months even. So
Oh.
before the pandemic, it was most weeks actually, but these days it's most months. So I have like a long-term project. So that's where the Naked Objects framework was originally used with Richard and Rob, and I guess I'm the last person there. I guess perhaps that shows a lack of imagination on my part, but originally I was there building the Naked Object system. This is for the central government, for the Department of. They change the name every so often when there's a new minister. That's kind of how it works. But their current name is Department of Social Protection. It's basically social welfare, so it's pensions and child benefit, and it's living alone allowance, and 40 short-term employment, long-term employment. So it's basically the social welfare stuff
Yeah,
of the
super
Republic
important,
of
right?
Ireland. Yeah, I mean every country has one, and so that basically still lives today. So that was a system I was involved with. It's 2004, I think, is when that kicked off. Now I don't kind of work on the system per se, but I have a slightly different role these days, a bit more strategic role, which I could talk about, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the Naked Object system is still going. It's 20 something years old. It has a big old fat SQL Server database, and
So
yeah, so that's.
I'm casting my mind back into the void of the distant past, and there was a fellow who wrote a regular expression library, and I remember he did an article in Java Pro or Dr. Dobbs or something, and I think I remember him talking about this stuff, naked objects, and any relation? Is one even remotely, possibly, peripherally?
Well, it's a
related
pretty
to the other?
unusual name, isn't it? So possibly, like Ted Neward, I know has done some stuff, and he's pretty well known, isn't he?
Oh,
So
I love him. Yeah.
it could have been him. I don't know. We're still quite niche, I suppose. So I don't know, but if it's an unusual name, that there is a band I think called Naked Objects, but I don't think they would be writing stuff. Yeah. So it goes back a long time. And
Wait,
then
did he create
after
the Java, the JGrok? Was that him?
JGrok, I don't know.
I think I'm reaching.
Yeah.
Interesting. Anyway, I suppose it'll come up later. I remember long time ago hearing about. It was some guy I used to read in the now defunct Dr. Dobbs and
Dr.
Java
Dobbs,
Pro
yeah.
and whatever.
It got quite a lot of interest for a little while, actually, I suppose. And then, anyway, and so the idea of it is, I suppose, it's worthwhile explaining a little bit. Here's the techie description, which perhaps is sort of just to cut through the BS type of thing. If you think about what, say, Hibernate does, an ORM, effectively you got your domain model, and effectively, you bootstrap your application. Hibernate, goes looking for all those entity annotations. It builds up its internal meta model.
Yeah.
And then it uses that to figure out how what kind of queries to run. The SQL basically is generated on the fly. This is something we all know, and that's how it works. And there's a lazy loading, and there's the automatically creating inserts. So it's not a code generation thing. It's done dynamically. Part of the bootstrapping is build up that meta model. So that's what Hibernate does, of course. So imagine the same idea, but to the presentation layer instead. So effectively, that's what the framework does. So Causeway, when the application starts, it goes looking for the domain model, the classes that represent the domain object model, and then it basically uses that to generate a user interface. So okay,
Is it
so
fair to say that Ruby on Rails kind of borrowed from this idea as well with their
there's a
original?
kind of an overlap, yeah. I think but you have to write more code with the Ruby on Rails type of
No
application.
doubt.
It's more of a code generation type of thing and scaffolding. And then you also have another one that's, of course, very popular these days, is the one that Matt Rabel works on, which is called, you can tell me because I've forgotten the name of it.
J Hipster.
J Hipster, that's the baby.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Well, do you remember
And
Bean Forms? That sort of.
yeah. But all of these things, effectively, well, perhaps not all of them, but it's often the case that effectively the generation of the additional artifacts to the presentation layer, they may be derived from the domain objects, but that's being done at kind of a compile time phase or like a build time phase, So then you've got to basically maintain that other stuff. Whereas, and if you think about Hibernate, it's not generating SQL statements for you to maintain. Effectively, all that stuff is done dynamically, right? So that's kind of the same idea with these frameworks, is effectively the UI, is effectively a representation, a projection, if you like, off of the domain object model. So it's like the Hibernate is effectively, its model is defining the data structure, the relationships. It's just the data.
Right.
Of course, where an application gets more interesting is you've got the behavior as well. Effectively, you can press a button and stuff happens.
One
So
hopes, anyway.
you would hope, wouldn't you? So and there's validation behind it, and there's kind of security rules, and so many other pieces of stuff you got to think about. So that's the kind of stuff that the framework takes care of effectively. So you've got this, say projection is quite a good way of thinking about it. That's why I think about it effectively. Yeah. So the naked objects, name, naked objects pattern, I think, or architecture, the name that Richard came up with it, is to sort of create that as a metaphor. And actually, a little bit of trivia. I should say it's Dr. Pawson, Richard Pawson. He got a PhD, and the external supervisor for his PhD was a guy called Trygve Reinskaug. I don't know if you know that name. Trygve Reinskaug. Trygve Reinskaug was he's still alive actually. He's in his 90s. I believe he's still alive.
That's
yeah,
so cool.
And he was the original guy who developed or came up with the MVC pattern. Right?
That old thing.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah. And apparently the idea was that the domain object models would automatically provide a representation of themselves. They just never got around to it back in those small talk days, So effectively, this is sort of like a realization of that original idea of you've got your objects and they've got behavior, and it's OO as your mother taught you type of thing, and encapsulated stuff. So that's kind of what the framework is about, is effectively at least originally, sort of kind of creating that sort of thing. But I've been, in this space for so long, I kind of forget what I've remembered and what I've forgotten. But, originally it was about OO, but the value of it comes from feedback loops. It comes from being.
Yeah, can I ask some probing questions? I'm trying to understand how this would work conceptually, and bearing in mind that we can't really do a demo since it's intended for a podcast. If I have in naked objects in this framework, I add what do I do? I add a library to the class path, I guess, and then I define a data type, an entity of some sort in my code. Does it have to be Hibernate, or can it just be any arbitrary data entity thing?
Yeah, well, JPA and JDO, but also actually view models as well. So how so you could basically, if you wanted to take responsibility for persisting the thing yourself, you could. The framework is about, its value add is the presentation layer. So I use and so of course we do bundle JPA and JDO, that's kind of part of the stack, because most of the time you
Yeah.
will want a database. But if you want to say, actually, it's we call them a view model, whether that's a good name, I don't know, but it's basically, it has all of the annotations or the metadata that the framework knows how to represent this stuff. But if you want to pull that data back from some other place, even from, say, a REST API, or just pull it back from Mongo or wherever you want to do that, well, you can do that as well. We don't provide an integration for that. You're just kind of like, you would do that bit
There are
yourself.
hooks.
Yeah, there are hooks, of course. Yeah, so effectively you can pull it back. So its value add is that. Yeah, it's like, and of course this stuff all sits on top of Spring Boot. So I mean,
Super good. Your
back
admin
in
Spring Boot?
2002, there wasn't a thing
No.
called Spring Boot. Do you know?
No, barely even a thing
So,
called Spring.
yeah, exactly. So in fact, the framework was originally written in Java 1.1. Would you believe? Yeah, so it really goes back, and so here's a little bit of a thing. I mentioned that this system is still used over in Ireland, in the department, the central government department, and so the original version of that. Do you remember a thing called J#?
Yeah, the Microsoft.NET JavaScript derivative
Yeah.
that lasted for like a week.
Well, it lasted a bit longer, but I think it was end of life in 2005, basically.
Sorry, it was Java on .NET. Yeah. 2000. It made it 3 years. That's incredible. I didn't realize. It was good. It was really good. I mean, I that and plus JScript.NET. I thought was really quite nice.
Those things,
well.
yeah, and there was Iron Python and all those good things, wasn't there? So,
yeah.
But this is the precursor to C#, and I think it was probably, I think Oracle, not Oracle, I guess it was Sun at the time, that was having the thing. Anyway, that's the legal side. But as I said,
you're thinking of.
No, J#.
Yeah, there's
J#. Yeah,
no,
not
the one that Sun created, the one that Microsoft created that gave Sun such hysterics was J++. Then they lost a lawsuit, a Pyrrhic victory if ever there was one for Sun, but they lost the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And then they came out with .NET, of which J# was the first, one of the flagship languages that launched.
That's true.
A few years later.
You're right.
Almost never.
But of course, they dropped J# pretty quickly once they'd written C#.
Right, which I quite like. C# is an amazing language.
Yeah, I think so too. I prefer the governance that we have with the Java.
Sure.
I think that what the Oracle guys are doing, and the way that they carefully think about, the way they evolve the language. Well, that's a whole other conversation, but which I'm happy to have. But I think we'd just be mutual fanboys of the way that Oracle are doing this stuff with those.
Couldn't say it better, sir.
Yeah. So, but I mean, so the original version of this framework was written in Java 1.1, and then but the department was a Microsoft company, a Microsoft sort of organization. So it was my idea. So, well, we'll just use it for prototyping. And then
sure.
I said,
that's how it always starts.
It'll never work, but I wonder if it would. That this framework written in Java 1.1 would cross compile into J#, and which it did, basically. It did. So that was the origin of this naked object system running over in Ireland. As I say, they're still running with the successor of that. It's of course changed over the years, but
is it still C# or is it Java?
Yeah. No, it's C#. It's a C# application these days, and it's running the naked objects. The .NET flavor. It kind of there was effectively a native C# kind of variant of that. So in a sense, the framework started as a Java thing, and then it forked at a certain point, and the .NET version, as I say, is used very successfully over there. And then the Java version was sitting around and not really being used. And so I kind of said to Richard, do you know? It would be kind of nice to do something with this, because all the interest was on the .NET side. So he said, that's okay, but we should change the name. Well, you can take it, but we'll keep the naked objects name for the .NET side. So I was living in Oxfordshire, and Richard and Rob were also in Oxfordshire. And I don't know if you know, but the River Thames runs through Oxford, right?
Yeah.
And the name of the River Thames, when it travels through Oxford, it changes its name for some reason. I guess it's a historical thing. Right,
like the framework.
Yeah, so exactly. So we use that, and then it's the Thames ISIS or just ISIS, right? So you see lots of, like, if you go to around Oxford and you go looking for, say, I know there's an alarm company called ISIS in Oxford,
There's also
Oxfordshire-based
a
local company.
terror
Yeah,
organization, but
exactly. So back in 2010, ISIS was a lovely name, and it kind of had this little bit of a reminder about the original guys who were there building this thing. And so I took responsibility for getting this ISIS, newly renamed ISIS code base into Apache, going through the incubator, and it graduated in
so that was
2012.
2010.
2010, yeah, exactly.
You're saying this has been an Apache project for almost 15 years, and
Jesus,
I've
yeah,
just
it
now
has.
stumbled upon it.
There you go.
Oh,
But
this is so
listen, there
embarrassing.
are so many Apache projects,
Oh,
and
that's
there
so
are big
sad.
ones and little ones, and I guess we're a little one. But yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
So
that's embarrassing, Dan. I'm gonna just have to take a moment. I'm in shambles right now. I can't believe that's so hard to accept. Oh wow, I'm so sorry.
Hey, but
Okay.
listen, I mean, at around about the same time, we said at some point, look, we want to move to Spring Boot, because we had done our own dependency injection and a whole bunch of other things because of the age of the code base. And it's like, what's the value add? It's like, let's think about where we are on the layer with value added. Spring and Spring Boot does all of this cool stuff. And those guys, let's stand on the shoulder of giants. And so that was the view. It's like, we know what we can do. Here's our philosophy. Some people like it, some people won't. So we spend quite a long time basically re-platforming, if you like, our original code base, throwing away as much stuff that we could. Let Spring do that stuff, and then we'll do the bit that we do that's kind of sitting on top. And in the course of that process, we changed the name because it's like, well, let's get out there, so that's why you wouldn't have heard of the Causeway name, perhaps, because that's relatively new.
Can I ask another stupid question? What is
a
causeway in English?
Yeah, coming up with names is tricky, right? But so causeway is a bridge, right? It's a bridge between things. Like you get them causeway across, maybe often like a water feature.
Yeah.
So one reason for that, I guess the official line would be, it's a bridge between the business world and the technical world. DDD, single team, ubiquitous language. We're all talking the same, and you do get that. I mean, that's a really important kind of part of our philosophy. Is that the DDD thing is a big thing really for us, because if you're going, there's nowhere to hide, is what it comes down to. I'll come back to that. I'll come second. The other element on the causeway though was in the north of Ireland, in Northern Ireland. There's a thing called the Giant's Causeway. You can Google it if you've not come across it. Anybody listening, just quickly Google it, and you will see it's a kind of a geological feature. It's called the Giant's Causeway, and you have these hexagonal bolsite, I think, is it? That's the map. These rocks, right? And it looks rather beautiful, right?
Yeah, it looks like it's designed as opposed to natural. Wow.
I've never actually been there, but it's quite a well-known thing. And so we just like the hexagons.
Yeah. Sure.
Hexagonal architecture. It's that kind of thing. So it was just, there were two different reasons. I mean, you got to have a reason. Those are our reasons. So whether they're good reasons, but hopefully there isn't another terrorist organization going to have the name Causeway. So we think we're on fairly safe ground now. Yeah. But yeah, it's it wasn't too
really nice project.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to say, what was I saying? I was saying about the kind of the feedback loop, the ubiquitous language, that kind of piece, the bridging piece between the business domain and the technical domain. So this is kind of what I've learned over the 2 decades plus of working in this space. It's insane, isn't it? Yeah.
So talk to me about this then, because you mentioned the entities, the domain objects, and they have intrinsic state. So let's just start with a very simple aggregate with no nested objects. Like I always like to start with a toy, like a customer with a first name and last name. Fine. So I created a naked object. I describe it with JPA. It's got an ID, it's got an entity annotation, it's got the generated value, and I've got a string, first name, last name. You derive the user interface from that?
Yeah.
What about, so is there, and do you handle, like if I just do @valid or @non-null or something like that? What about validation?
Yeah. To be honest, it is on the to-do list to support those those declarative constraints. But what we do have is kind of our own set, or you can do
Okay,
or you can do imperative checks as well.
that's
So
better. I like that.
yeah. So for example, okay, you'd have a get name, set name,
Mhm.
which would be public or they could be private. Actually, we don't care because the framework has got, it uses reflection a lot underneath the covers, as you might imagine,
Sure.
just as the way that Hibernate would do. So if you wanted to do,
And
say, an
swing.
imperative kind of validation of the name,
Mhm.
you'd have a supporting, it's a property, supposing. So you want to be able to change the value, but names aren't allowed to include an exclamation mark, say,
Sure.
for reasons. There's certain characters you're not allowed to
It's not
have.
Ruby.
Yeah. So you'd have validate name would be the name of the method, take an argument of type name. All right. And so what the framework will do is it will notice that we call these things supporting methods, right? Kind of sitting adjacent. It binds it together by naming convention. If I've got a get name, set name, validate name.
Yeah.
So that's going to cause it's editable presumably. So the user interface will allow you to enter a name in a field, and then you hit OK, or actually you tab out, I suppose it would be. Then the validate will be called. So effectively that's the proposed name. Is this valid?
Right.
And this validate name method is going to return a string. So if it returns null, happy days, no problems. If it returns some non-null value, then that's the reason why it's not valid. You can't have an exclamation mark in the name because type of thing. So that's one way of doing it.
Okay, I like that. What about cross-field validation? If I want to, if I need to check two things before I can make an assertion that something is wrong,
Yeah, well then you would be
an
wanting to
assessment
write
rather.
an action. Yeah, like an action, I suppose, or like a date. Say, I don't know, from and to. That would be a typical thing,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? I suppose. Yeah. So you're more likely to have an action there. We call it an action. So that would be a public method. I don't know. We should make an example of this. What would be, for example, your holiday, right? So effectively, your holiday is going to go from to certain dates, and you want to change. Oh, I think I'm going to shift it a bit, start a bit later and end a bit later, type of thing. So both the start and the end date of your holiday is going to change. But you want to make sure that they still meet that rule that the start date should be before the end date, presumably. So that would be an
Right.
action, right? And then you get into a conversation about what's the name of this action going to be? What do we want to represent this as in the user interface? What is the business thing that's happening? Like there'll be a bit of, this is the ubiquitous language, get into the conversation with a business person to say,
Right.
well, we're adjusting the holiday, or we're replanning the holiday. There'll be some word they used, that kind
Yeah.
of is this thing that has to happen. So that would be kind of the name of the action, reschedule, taking in a from date and a to date. So those would be the two parameters of this action called reschedule, this method, a public method, public holiday, reschedule, from date to date.
Nice.
Okay. And then you'd have a validate, right? So the idea of validating, you can have a validate reschedule. So effectively we're sort of tying those things together as well. So we can effectively check whether they are valid. And so the framework is kind of like I think of sequence diagrams when I describe this. Effectively, there's a protocol between the framework is sitting between you and between the end user and the domain object. There's the framework, and it's going to effectively mediate the way in which those sort of methods are called, right? So we're going to call the validate, and if that's good, then we're going to proceed, and if not, so it could be just changing a single value, or it could be invoking an action. So we'll call the validate if one exists, validate reschedule, giving it the from date, the to date. If the from date is after the to date, return a string. Sorry, that's invalid because of blah. Otherwise, proceed through and do the thing. Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah. So okay. So and I could do, it's Hibernate. So presumably there's equivalent hooks for my aggregate sort of collections and this sort of thing. Like if I wanted to traverse
Yeah.
out. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, normally, to be honest, in practice, most of the time you're using actions because, in fact, we almost, if we're I'm on my way to Amsterdam, and so that's where I work on a project for a company there, and we have like basically an ERP for that company, and whenever we want to extend the scope of the system, there's usually a spreadsheet. Do you know that, like, the business people will have built a spreadsheet to semi-automate the thing that they need to do. So if we want to bring that into kind of scope of the system, then the first thing we do is try to kind of model that and sort of, normalize it and try to figure out what the names of these concepts. And
Sure.
actually, we'll always make it read only, so they can see the data, and then you have the conversation. We've misunderstood the data. Find the names. Get rid of the, sort out the problems. And only after we kind of got the data into the system, then we can say, okay, you want to change it? Okay, tell me why you want to change it, and then you kind of use that as an exploration process to, understand what they're trying to do with the data. Yeah. So actions are I mean, you can, a simple thing like notes or description or something where there's no real business logic. Sure, let them just change the value as a single thing. But any kind of, more interesting business logic, there will probably be an action that represents that transformation of state from, before you've done the thing and then after you've done the thing.
Okay. So you can get it sounds like it starts off as little more than just a few well-named methods, but it can really grow to be the one-stop shop for everything after the entity, including the business logic and the validation and then the UI. Back to the UI, lest I forget, what is the UI? Is it server-side rendered HTML, or is it React and Vue or something? I don't know.
It's the current implementation is in another Apache project, actually, which is Apache Wicket. So it's a server-side render thingy.
Nice. I love Wicket. And there's a Spring Boot starter for that as well. Wicket's great. Good stuff.
Yeah. But of course, I mean, as a user of our framework, you don't need to know Wicket. It's kind of an implementation detail.
Sure.
But there's a Wicket viewer that basically does that. Now we are kind of working on a Vardin viewer, but it takes which will be So Marcus, I think, has done a bit of blogging and stuff on this. Yeah.
Who, by the way, became a Java champion today. Congratulations to our friend Marcus. He was confirmed as a Java champion today on the Twitters today. We saw that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So, but I mean, it takes a certain amount of time, and we all have our day jobs, so it's proceeding slowly, but it's there, and it's there in some Git repo. So
I'm a big Vaadin fan, and so sign me up for both Wicket and Vaadin.
Yeah, no, exactly, and we'll get there. So that's kind of, I suppose, the primary thing, and I mean, behind the scenes, the implementation of that viewer, we call these things viewers, the Wicket viewer. It's a chain of responsibility pattern. So effectively it goes and says, I've got an entity. Does anybody know how to render the entity? And then if not, it says, okay, I'm going to break it down to the smaller pieces. I've got some, field properties, we call them. We have some collections. We have some actions. We have a thing here that's a blob that could be a PDF. And then, the PDF component says, I could render that for you. So, so it is an extensible viewer, but on the other hand, you would need to know some Wicket. So in practice, to be honest, it's not like people go around, but we designed it that way, and the Vardin viewer will work the same way effectively. Just break it all out and spin it there.
So that use case you just described of a spreadsheet, could you create like a view that rendered a spreadsheet, and then when somebody updates the cell, they actually end up updating the naked object?
Yeah, that's. I mean, we don't have it, I must admit. I suppose these things get built as needed. And I think perhaps the reason we've not needed to is because, like, a spreadsheet is kind of reminiscent of a CRUD-based system. And there's nothing wrong with CRUD, but and that's fine. But where I think, and actually, do you know what? Sometimes when people come across this idea, they think, "Oh, that's great for CRUD," and we kind of go, "Well, yeah, you can use it for CRUD, but actually where it's really good for is not the CRUD, is the more complicated systems. As I say, the system over in Ireland, which is administered by, 40 plus different benefits for this, 7,000 users. It's like, it is basically the benefit system for Ireland. And then over in my other client in Amsterdam. So so you can use it for CRUD, but actually it's better for the more complicated things. That kind of gets you into DDD type of mindset effectively.
Domain-driven design, huge fan. Somebody else asked another question. I'm going to throw it up on screen here. I don't know what the answer is, so I figured I'll punt and give it to you. Curious to know, Raja asks, sometimes UI may not be the only entry point to create an entity. If the entity could be created using APIs as well, how do we avoid the duplication of creation logic.
So this is kind of about the domain. You've got your domain objects and you've got representations of them, projections of them. So there's the HTML user interface, and that's what we've been describing. But you can have different representations. So you can have a REST API. So we have a REST, we have a REST viewer, and then we have a GraphQL one, which was done a year or so ago. So you can basically just, and I love it because it's great for demo. I suppose you like that as well. So,
But speaking my language, buddy.
Yeah. So and then you're kind of shifting where the responsibility is for different things. Like with the HTML viewer, it implements the business logic, well, the way to interact with the business logic, and of course it renders the pixels as well.
Right.
Whereas when you have say GraphQL, well, you're still keeping the business logic over on the server, but you're the pixels are rendered in whatever you want to use, React or whatever it might be. So, and I think for me it's kind of important for frameworks to provide these places to kind of get out of the box and to be able to use it and so forth. Actually, another way of thinking about this, which I sometimes talk about, is I'm ripping off Richard here because this was his original thing, but problem solvers versus process followers. You come across this? There was a guy called Alan Cooper who wrote a book called "The Inmates Are Running the Asylum," which is a fantastic book. You know that one? He talked about transient applications and sovereign applications. So your sovereign application is your IDE, IntelliJ, every shortcut. You never use any of the wizards because they would patronize you, right? I mean, you just don't need them because you know everything. That is the place where you live. Yeah. But say maybe like I'm the same. But supposing I want to say use Photoshop or something, adjacent, I could kind of work my way around. But I'd be wanting to use some wizards. Or actually, the example I like the most is we're flying and stuff. So if I go to the airline and I want to check into my flight, I'm going to go up to a kiosk and I'm typing, scan my passport and type in a code. Do you know? So I don't use that every day, and I don't know what the plane's going to be, and I don't know which runway it is, and I don't know whether how many, who's going to be the pilot and stuff. I just follow a process, So I'm using an application, but it's a very much a transient type of thing. So you kind of have the spectrum of applications from those that you kind of intimately familiar with, you're the domain expert of everything in that application, versus you just follow the buttons, you just follow the wizards, but next, and you're done type of thing.
Right.
So Alan Cooper called those sovereign applications is your IntelliJ application, and your transient applications is the thing you use occasionally. And so it's the same is true with the framework. Like where the sort of the HTML viewer, the Wicket viewer of Causeway lives is kind of for users who are experts in the domain. Do you know?
Right.
Like we've got our 7,000 civil servants who know every single bit of thing about whether you're eligible for child benefit or whatever the rules are, or the laws of the land are.
Right.
Same for my client over in Amsterdam, with the users there, they're experts in administering the system. And so for them, really, the HTML viewer works well because effectively it doesn't provide any wizards. It just says, well, look, here's the state and here's the buttons, and you're meant to know what they're meant to mean. But actually, you name them anyway. It was when you told us that thing should be called reschedule holiday. Well, that was the name that you gave it, and we figured out what that meant and what its behavior was meant to be. Then at the other extreme, though, for the API kind of thing, is it's effectively that's for transient applications. So if you want to create some very beautiful crafted thing in React or Vue or choose your favorite thing, sure, you can do that and put it onto some mobile phone or something. And then just have it calling stuff at the back end. So it's kind of to provide that sort of that spectrum of use case support, really.
That's so you start simple and you can scale out, but you keep the same domain throughout, which is, I think, super good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in today's world, because again, like you just mentioned, there's a lot of clients now, but there's only one. Like the law of the land is the same no matter which client you're on. So having that be skinnable, so to speak, or as a strategy, or as a plugin or an SPI or whatever.
What's that thing? Omni-channel? Have you come across that? Isn't that an awful phrase? Anyway, omni-channel? Is that the same thing? I think it is. Anyway, but lots of different presentations for the same underlying domain model.
Yeah. Super good. Wow. Okay. So okay, that's so I guess okay. So I go to start.spring today. I generate a new project with JPA and my database of choice. Create some annotations. I add Apache causeways. I guess you have a starter.
Yeah, we haven't. I must admit, it's on my to-do list to kind of get it integrated into start.io. I need to find someone. You can point me to somebody or show me in terms of how you get stuff bundled into it.
So you don't even have to be. I mean, do you have your own starter at least with the project?
Yeah, well, we support a GitHub repo, and people can just clone that, and effectively then they're off and running within the time it takes to go git clone, maven, clean install type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Cool.
Yeah, so that gets you going, and then and so effectively, it's Spring Boot. So effectively, there's a whole bunch of modules that make up the framework. I guess fundamentally, there's one called the applib, application library. That's where the annotations are. That effectively, you would have a reference to at property, at action, at whatever it might be. Those are obviously Causeway in the Causeway namespace package. And then there's kind of the implementation that drives, the integration, the Wicket viewer. That's going to be referenced by your top level configuration. So what's the right term for that? We call these things. We have a name for it, but it's kind of a proprietary name. But is there a proper name for it, Josh? The top level at configuration that basically defines everything in your app. Yeah. Sorry, say again.
The Java config is the Java in Spring, right? The at configuration class.
Yeah, and then each of those is like a module, and you can go at import, and you can have basically a nested set of these things. So like, what's the name of the top one though? Do you have an actual specific name for it?
No, I mean
no.
You're all these things exist inside of an application context, which
the top level application context. Yeah. So we call that top level application context app the app manifest. It's a name that is left over. It's just an app it's just an app configuration. It just happens to be the top one that imports everything else, basically. So we just give it that name. It's like the table of contents of the application, if you like.
Yeah.
So you're going to be importing the module that includes your domain objects, your entities and your view models, and they are going to be importing in turn the applib for the annotations. But your top level is going to be referencing the Wicket viewer and the GraphQL viewer and the integration with JPA and all of that kind of stuff as well.
Okay, you're assembling it sort of.
Yeah, effectively it's just a great big graph of dependencies. So I think there's about 160, I have to look it up, something like 160 different modules or app configurations that make up the framework. So it's very fine-grained, as you'd imagine, similar to any typical Spring application.
Right. This is super cool. I really appreciate this. This is exactly the kind of stuff I like to try out and see. Because I'm sure a lot of people are building these kinds of apps where they know the database, and they don't want to be bothered. They can't be arsed to like develop 10 years of React skills to get a user interface first. Like I just want to, come on, let me just get this thing going.
Exactly. And then later on, you can put that React. If you need it for those transient users, so you can do that as well. But you're always going to need like some admin pages as the minimum, for so you'd probably want to have that anyway.
Right.
Or of course you could just put some regular Spring controllers alongside the ultimately the Wicket viewer is a Spring controller, of course.
Right.
So that's fine. That's kind of under that sort of path. That's going to be you're in Causeways land.
Yeah.
But then you can of course write some additional stuff as well if you want to. So yeah.
Nice. Well, okay. Where do let's as we wind up or wind down here, couple of questions, the usual questions. Where do people find out more about this? Where do they go? Do they just Google Apache Causeway, or what's the URL to get?
I mean, of course, we're on the web. Causeway.apache.org is, effectively where we are. And then you can jump onto our Slack, or you can join the mailing list. That's the usual way of engaging with Apache projects. So we're just typical in that regard. That's probably the best way to do it, I would say. And yep.
Okay.
Exactly. So.
And then And then second question, are you on the internet and do you want to be found? And if so, where can people find you?
You can always email me. You'll probably find me just googling. You'll put my name there. You'll find me there. You can get me on my Apache thing. I think it's Dan Haywood at apache.org. That's probably a good one to use. Yeah, you can use that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So cool. Super good. I will. Do you mind if I link to that video you sent me? The
Dub joke.
Dublin Java User Group talk, which was I
Yes.
think very enticing. I'll put that in the YouTube video. This is super good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Josh. I really appreciated the time to chat with you. It's been great fun.
My fun, pleasure. And to everybody else, thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Hope you're having a great week, and see you next time.